Yeah. Analytics off the chain, other channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. I'm a headliner.
Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back into the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle back with our Week 9 tight end start-sit analysis for every matchup on the slate this week. We've got a lot of tight ends to talk about, but before we jump into all of the information, we got to take a look back at Week 8 and what our accuracy was. And Week 8 at the tight end position was, how do I explain this? It was good in a way, because there was a lot of tight ends that scored touchdowns this week, but it was bad because I didn't have a lot of them listed as starts. Now, take a look at the percentage this week, 61%. And like I mentioned, Swaim, Croft, Doyle, among others. If you score like one touchdown at the tight end position, basically you're going to hit the 8 fantasy points. So there was like I mentioned, there was a lot of tight ends this week that didn't have huge days, but they found the end zone. So it basically made him a start because it got him 8 fantasy points. So that's good in a sense, but bad because I missed on them, but it is what it is, right? It's no big deal. A lot of those guys you probably weren't going to be starting anyway. So let's take a look at it this week and hop into what we will be doing with the tight end position. We've got a new giveaway here in November. We've done one every month of the season so far, and we're gonna bump it up a little bit here in November because instead of giving away a signed jersey and things of that nature, we're gonna do cold hard cash, baby. The holidays are coming up. Maybe you got a little extra shopping you want to do. Maybe you want to treat yourself. We're gonna give away $500 in cold hard cash this November, and the giveaway, as always, is tied to our friends over at Prize Picks. Download their app, go to their website, create a free account, use the code word headliners when you do it, and then deposit $20. Prize Picks is going to match your $20, and then you will be in the drawing for our $500 giveaway here in November. If you've already signed up for Prize Picks using our code word, you're good. You don't need to do anything else. But if you haven't, it's time to do it. But speaking of time to do it, it's time to jump into the tight ends. Let's see what we got on tap here in Week 9, who we can trust, and who should we just put out the pasture for the week. The Jets are going to head to Indy to kick off Week 9 on Thursday Night Football. Ryan Griffin, Tyler Kroft. I am taking a slight look at Tyler Kroft this week, but for me, it's going to depend on Corey Davis. If Corey Davis ends up being out, I think Tyler Kroft could potentially make an impact this week. We'll talk about that more in the rankings video on Thursday morning when those release. Hopefully, we have more word on Corey Davis at that time, but the Colts do allow the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And like I talked about in the wide receiver video, last week was really kind of the short passing game for this team. And I would expect Tyler Kroft to definitely be kind of in that conversation this week if there's no Corey Davis. He could end up finding himself inside my top 20 tight end. So make sure you check back on Thursday to see whether or not he does that. Now for Indianapolis, I am going to go back to Mo Alley-Cox this week. Jack Mother and Doyle found the end zone last week, but Mo still had more targets. He had the 4 targets. Doyle had the 2 targets. Doyle was just able to turn his into a touchdown, which was great. But for Mo Alley, the Jets allow the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So I definitely think, especially if T.Y. Hilton doesn't play this week, that we could see some Mo Alley, Mo Cox, Mo Problems find the end zone. Cleveland at Cincinnati, and for Cleveland, Cincinnati allows the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends, but this does kind of feel like a David Njoku week. So he's had basically one big performance all season long. He's been super inconsistent in the rest, barely done anything, but there's something in my gut that says if the Browns are going to beat Cincinnati this week, they're going to have to get David Njoku involved. Keep an eye on it. We'll see if there's anything that pops up on the report, if any of the wide receivers end up being limited, whatever it may be. For me, it just feels like David Njoku could get involved. Not a strong enough feeling that I can list him as a start right now. That's just a little bit too much of a risk for me. On the flip side for Cincinnati, CJ, who's your mama? The Browns have barely allowed 10 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends this season. I do feel like we get Tyler Boyd again this week. We got him last week. And like I've mentioned a couple of times, for CJ Uzomah, if he does something, Tyler Boyd is not going to do anything. If Tyler Boyd does something, CJ Who's Your Mom is not going to do anything. That's the problem with these two. They live in the same area of the field. Joe Burrow is going to find one or the other, but both of them are likely not to succeed together. Denver at Dallas, and let me tell you something about Denver. Noah Fant, I'm going to give him another shot against Dallas because they allow the 15th most fantasy points per game, or they allow 15 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, excuse me. But last week, when Albert Owakabanabam, I can't pronounce his last name to save my life. We'll come up with a nickname for him. He needs one, right? Albert O. He only ran 7 more routes than Albert O last week. Noah Fant was not utilized nearly as much, and that could be a huge concern for us moving forward, especially with Jerry Jeudy back, and especially with the amount of touches Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams get together. That is something to monitor. Keep an eye on it, Noah Fant owners. I'm going to give Fant a shot this week because the matchup calls for it. But if Albert O continues to get that much run in the offense, that is going to be an issue for us. For Dallas, we're going to go back to Dalton Schultz. He had 7 targets last week, which was great, but Dak should be back this week. Cooper Rush did a great job filling in, but he went to his guys. He went to the big playmakers when it mattered most. He did try to get 7 targets over to Schultz. Didn't turn into much, but with Dak being back, I expect that production to return. Houston at Miami, and for the Houston Texans, I'm keeping an eye on Brevin Jordan. Now, this is a decent matchup this week, and if Jordan had been healthy longer and had actually been playing more, I would consider it against Miami. I like the steps that he took last week. I talked about it in the waiver wire video. This is a guy very, very athletically gifted coming out of Miami. We talked about him this offseason, both myself and Chris Chouse did over on Headliner U. So we like him. He is a guy that can become an impact player at the tight end position. But he's only 1 game into his career after missing a majority of the season due to injury. So we're going to continue to monitor it. We'll see what his production looks like this week, but definitely could be a guy going forward that we grab up and utilize. Mike Gesicki, we are going to start for another week because Houston's been awful against tight end, allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game. But Parker coming back, being healthy, really could end up limiting the production and the volume for Mike Gesicki. That's kind of what he's lived on for the last few weeks. If that starts to disappear, then we run into issues. Atlanta at New Orleans, and I know a lot of people right now are like, oh, Calvin Ridley's gone for the time being. That means Kyle Pitts. Be wary of it, okay? Now, if he lines up a majority in the slot this week, I like him this week. But if he starts facing a ton of cornerback 1 coverage, that is where things could get messy. So this week, if he's in the slot a lot, which is where they've been trying to get him a majority of the time this season, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who plays also in the slot as their nickel corner, he allows a completion rate of almost 70%. I definitely think Kyle Pitts can beat up on him a little bit, so I like that. I do not want to run with Hayden Hurst as of yet. I talked about it in the waiver wire video. I got to see what happens with this Atlanta offense. Looking at the different outcomes, there's a lot of different things that they could do with no Calvin Ridley. Part of that is getting Hayden Hurst included a little bit more. So in the coming weeks, we might be able to start him. But for this week, I'm probably going to say no to it. We'll see what happens. If he finds the end zone, he becomes a start. I just don't know if he finds the end zone this week. As of this recording, there is no information on Darren Waller right now. Last we knew is he was going to be staying around the facility, getting treatment last week, still day to day. They have not updated us at this point. Now, if he plays this week, I play him. If he is out again, Foster Moreau, he is going to become a start. So I've got him listed as a sit right now. If Darren Waller ends up being out, then Foster Moreau will end up becoming a start. So make sure that you keep an eye on that. Come back on Thursday for the tight end rankings video, and then we can talk a little bit more about whether or not we need to start him based on how Darren Waller looks. Now, for the New York Jets, part of their game plan against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football was utilizing the tight ends a little bit more. Both Evan Ingram and Kyle Rudolph scored, but that's it. Just scoring. There wasn't a whole lot of volume for them. It's not like all of a sudden it was like, oh, great, yeah, we're starting these guys again. That's all. No. They just haven't done enough so far this season. So even with the touchdowns last week, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's a lot of guys. That's basically what Evan Ingram and Kyle Rudolph did. They scored, and that was it. New England and Carolina. And Carolina's defense, I think, is going to give New England a lot of problems this week. And if New England is going to be successful, they're going to have to get the tight ends utilized a little bit more. Hunter Henry, he's been very touchdown dependent. Now, he had a 33-yard catch last week, which was great, but it was his only catch. We got to get him more involved on a volume basis. I would love to see that, especially since he's able to make those big plays. That's going to push him even higher up the rankings. But as of right now, Hunter Henry is a little bit more TD dependent than I would like to trust. But it's the tight end position. Who isn't? For Jonnu Smith, I'd like to get him going again too, but they're just not utilizing him the way that I thought they would at the beginning of the season. Especially in matchups like this one, where Carolina's defense is so good against the pass. Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry would be excellent plays for them this week to really get going, to help stretch the field a little bit, make some of that attention move into the tight end, and then maybe open up like Nelson Aguilar for a big strike down the field, or at least keep players out of the box to still run the ball with Damian Harris. So we need to get them going, but unfortunately that just hasn't been the case with Jonnu Smith. For Carolina, Ian Thomas, Tommy Tremble. Again, Tremble, yeah, he's found the end zone a couple of times this season, but not enough consistency to start on a regular basis. Buffalo at Jacksonville. Dawson Knox still out. I've got that listed here as just a reminder. Again, it doesn't count towards our accuracy because I have him listed as out. Don't worry about it. Tommy Sweeney, he's not going to provide any Knox-like numbers. That's Cole Beasley right now. That, again, is taking those throws, taking those targets that were going to Dawson Knox. They're coming back to him now. For Jacksonville, Buffalo allows the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to tight end. Dan Arnold had a great week last week, right? He's really starting to come into his own. I love it, but this is just such a tough matchup. It's hard for me to start Dan Arnold this week. I think Buffalo is going to come out rolling at Jacksonville, and Jacksonville's just not going to be able to get anything going offensively. Minnesota at Baltimore is going to bring us a couple of tight ends that we can start this week. Chris Herndon's going to be a sit, but Tyler Conklin is going to be a start. Baltimore allows the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Now, that number is inflated slightly based on some huge performances at the beginning of the season by some very good tight ends. But even with that being said, Conklin's usage last week was great. If you've been around here at the Fantasy Headliners for a while, you've heard me talk about this Minnesota offense and how getting the tight ends more involved would be so good for it. Hopefully this is a sign of things to come. Great week last week. Some awesome plays from Tyler Conklin. Big plays and volume. Let's get that moving forward. Let's get that going in this matchup against Baltimore. I think it would do that offense a lot of good. It'll help open up things for Justin Jefferson a little bit. Adam Thielen is definitely going to smash this week, though, I'm feeling. And for Baltimore, for Mark Andrews, Minnesota doesn't allow a whole lot of fantasy points per game to tight ends, but it doesn't matter. Mark Andrews is one of the hottest tight ends in the league. Coming out of the bye, we're 100% starting him. The Los Angeles Chargers at the Philadelphia Eagles is going to bring my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. That's right, our friends over at Manscaped are back for another season as one of our main sponsors. So if you're looking to get yourself tidied up a little bit, we'll say, head to manscaped.com, use code word headliners when you check out. You're going to get 20% off all of your purchase, and you're going to get free shipping. So make sure you do that over at manscaped.com. For the Los Angeles Chargers, Jared Cook is going to be a start for me, and I am loving the matchup this week. Philly allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Obviously, we're going to see Darius Slay on the outside going against Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. It could end up being a little bit of a tougher matchup for one of those guys, whoever he ends up going up against, which could open up a lot of opportunities for Jared Cook this week. I really, really like his potential to have a great week. I'm going to have him inside my top 12 tight ends. And for Dallas Goedert on the Philadelphia side, LA allows the 2nd fewest fantasy points per game to tight ends, but it doesn't matter. Dallas Goedert gets the targets. He's one of the safest tight ends in the league. I'm still going to start him this week. He should still see plenty of volume. He is the safety valve for Jalen Hurts right now, and Jalen Hurts needs all the help he can get. Green Bay at Kansas City, and for Green Bay this week, Mercedes Lewis, I just not yet. Maybe at some point, but Bobby Tunyon didn't do anything. He's going to be gone for the rest of the season now. It's hard to believe Mercedes Lewis does anything right away. We'll continue to monitor that though, especially if Lazard possibly still doesn't get back this week, if MVS doesn't get back this week. All those things combined, we'll talk about it with Mercedes Lewis, maybe a little bit more in the rankings video if things change. And for Kansas City, Travis Kelce, awful game. Awful game on Monday Night Football. Had that bad fumble. Didn't do anything for a majority of the game. Still got to start him, though. He's the #1 tight end for a reason. You don't put him on the bench. Arizona at San Francisco. And with Zach Ertz, it's been a lot of what we've talked about, right? It could be some boom. It could be some bust. He is seeing a decent amount of targets. He's putting together some okay performances. He's not scoring a ton of fantasy points. I mean, he only got like 6 points last week. However, the opportunity is still there, right? Just keep in mind, like I've said, since the trade, with all of the receiving weapons that they have there, with the way Chase Edmonds is utilized in the passing game, big performances by Zach Ertz are probably going to be unlikely on most days, but we are going to start him. Absolutely. The matchup potentially calls for it. And then for George Kittle, sounds like he's going to be practicing. The last thing that I read before I did this video was that George Kittle is expected to practice this week. So I'm going to go ahead and list him as a start right now. Make sure you check back on Thursday, though. If for some reason he re-aggravates any injury, isn't feeling up to par, doesn't practice, whatever it may be, then we'll address it in the rankings. Tennessee at the Rams, there's not going to be a whole lot to play here. Firkser's not going to be a start for me. Jeff Swaim's not going to be a start for me. Swaim ended up finding the end zone last week, but it's one of those I talked about earlier, right? Guy finds the end zone, scores, he's a start. I'm not going to count on that every single week. And for Tyler Higbee, came out of an excellent week last week. Excellent matchup with nothing. He continues to be a downward trend at this point since starting the year on a decent note. He hasn't done much since. We're moving on for now. The Monday Night Football matchup with Chicago and Pittsburgh brings a couple of tight ends that for a while now I have been begging to get more involved. Cole Kmet, I'm getting sucked in again. To Cole Kmet. Pitt has been very good against the tight end. But if you saw the game plan last week for Chicago, now is Matt Nagy going to come back in and absolutely ruin it? Probably, because that's Matt Nagy. He sucks. But Cole Kmet needs to be a bigger part of this offense. Cole Kmet needs to be a bigger part of the game plan. And to beat Pittsburgh this week, especially with like TJ Watt coming in on the quarterback, they're going to have to get the ball out quickly. And Cole Kmet is going to be a guy that can help with that. With Pittsburgh on the other side, kind of the same thing. Last week, 7 targets, second on the team. Pittsburgh, Ben Roethlisberger just doesn't have the mobility anymore like he used to. And that causes problems. No Juju Smith-Schuster, been saying it for weeks. If there's no Juju, there's an opportunity for Pat Freiermuth. And we saw that come to fruition last week. And I think it finally continues this week against Chicago. All right, Headliner Nation, that does it for my Week 9 start and sit analysis at the tight end position. Make sure you hit the like button for me if you appreciate the content and leave a comment down below. Who is somebody that you're excited to watch this week? What is a matchup that you think is good? Let me know if you're starting them or if you're just excited to catch it on TV. And then as always, if you're new here, you got to subscribe and stick around. I'm going to get out of here, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate all of you stopping in. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.